Welcome to the deep dive. Tonight, we're going to be looking at something pretty dark.
Yeah, we're going deep into the heart of 1980s Los
The
Angeles.
time of the night stalker.
Richard Ramirez.
Exactly.
You know, it's one thing to know the who's in true crime, but what's truly unsettling is trying to grasp the why.
The why.
What could drive a person to commit such terrifying acts? That's what we're exploring today.
And we're going to do that by looking at...
His Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, just taking a look at this. It's already...
It's dark.
Yeah, there's this palpable darkness surrounding his life. Where do we even begin to unravel something like this?
Well, just like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Okay.
Let's start with his early years.
Okay.
The source mentions a tumultuous childhood.
Yeah.
A father known for his explosive temper.
Right.
And young Richard bearing the brunt of it.
Frequent beatings.
We're talking frequent beatings. Even an incident where a swing knocked him unconscious.
Oh, wow.
Potentially leading to epileptic seizures later on in his life.
Really?
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
So it's like setting him up for...
Yeah, almost like a blueprint for a dark path, isn't it?
Yeah, and then there's this chilling detail about his cousin Mike, a Vietnam War veteran.
Oh, yeah.
Who apparently exposed Richard to graphic photos and stories from the war, even boasting about his own acts of violence.
Now imagine that for a moment.
Yeah.
Being a young, impressionable boy, already living in a volatile environment, and then being bombarded with these images and tales of brutality.
Right.
Some psychologists theorize about the cycle of violence, where early exposure to aggression can desensitize a person, almost normalize it as a way to exert power or control.
It's a disturbing thought, and it makes you wonder, how much can we truly blame on a person's upbringing?
Right. Is it nature versus nurture,
Yeah.
or this terrifying cocktail of both?
Yeah.
That age-old debate, right?
Right.
But it's clear that exposure to violence, especially in those formative years, can have a profound impact.
Especially when you consider other potential risk factors like the head injury and the seizures.
Right.
It paints a really complex picture.
It does.
And violence wasn't just something that he witnessed, it became a part of his own life early on.
That's right.
Petty theft as a teenager, escalating to more serious offenses. There's even mention of an attempted sexual assault,
Oh, wow.
only thwarted by the victim's husband.
What's interesting here is that these early crimes often offer glimpses into a criminal's developing modus operandi,
Right.
their signature.
Right.
But with Ramirez, there wasn't a clear pattern at first, which is particularly unsettling.
Right. It's that chilling randomness that made him so terrifying.
Yes.
The victims, the methods, it all felt unpredictable. He was like a phantom striking without any discernible reason or rhyme.
And that lack of pattern made him incredibly difficult to get.
Of course.
He wasn't targeting a specific type of person or sticking to a routine.
Yeah.
He was opportunistic, driven by something primal, using whatever was at hand, guns, knives, even his bare hands to carry out his attack.
Wow.
This unpredictability, I think, is what fueled the terror in Los Angeles at the time.
The Wikipedia entry really paints a grim picture of his crimes, breaking into homes in the dead of night, sometimes even eating and drinking in the houses of his victims.
That detail speaks volume, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
a level of detachment that's truly chilling, almost as if he wanted to obliterate any sense of humanity,
Right.
both in himself and his victims. And then there's the mention of satanic symbols found at some crime scenes.
Right, adding to the mystery.
It adds this layer of the occult, the ritualistic.
Speaking of mystery, his capture was something else.
Oh, yeah.
The source describes this dramatic chase through the streets of L.A., spurred on by his face plastered all over the newspapers.
What's fascinating there is the role the public played. This was before social media.
Right.
So people relied on newspapers, television, word of mouth. It was a city on edge.
Wow.
United by fear, and ultimately it was a collective effort that cornered him.
And when they finally did, it was almost like a scene from a vigilante movie.
Really?
A near lynching stopped just in time by the police.
Wow, that speaks to the raw emotion he ignited in people.
Absolutely. The fear, the anger, the desperate need for justice, it all culminated in that moment. And even though he was apprehended, convicted, sentenced to death, the questions about his motives lingered.
They did.
Even after his death in prison in 2013.
The fascination, the need to understand this darkness continues.
It's a human impulse, isn't it? To try and comprehend the seemingly incomprehensible.
It is.
We can condemn his actions.
Yes.
But there's this undeniable pull to peer into the abyss,
Right.
to try and grasp what lurked within Richard Ramirez.
And perhaps in seeking to understand the shadows, we might find some sliver of light.
Yeah.
Some way to prevent such darkness from taking root again.
Perhaps, but for now, let's delve deeper into these shadows.
Okay.
Let's explore the alleged satanic connection, the way his story has seeped into popular culture, and see if we can glean any insights from this truly disturbing chapter of history.
Sounds good.
So those satanic symbols at some of the crime scenes, it's a pretty creepy thought.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of mystique to the case, but I think we gotta be careful not to get too caught up in the sensationalism of it all.
Right, was his supposed embrace of Satanism, Like a genuine belief system, or was it just a performance to amplify the terror?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the source mentions that Ramirez openly claimed to be a Satanist,
Right.
but it doesn't go into much detail about his actual beliefs or practices.
So how do we make sense of that in the context of Richard Ramirez? Does it help explain his actions, or is it just another weird piece of this whole puzzle?
Well, it's a question that's puzzled a lot of people for a long time.
Yeah.
Some theories suggest that for some people, embracing dark ideologies like certain interpretations of Satanism
Right.
could be a way to rationalize their violent urges, give them a sense of purpose.
Almost like a twisted justification?
Exactly, but it's really important to remember that that's just one interpretation.
Okay.
Others argue that in Ramirez's case, it might have been more about creating a persona, like crafting this scary image to boost his notoriety, his infamy.
Like a brand.
Yeah, it's like he was consciously building this mythology around himself.
This dark legend that would live on.
Exactly, and in a way he succeeded.
Yeah.
Ramirez's case, with all of its unsettling elements, has really seeped into our collective consciousness.
For sure.
It's inspired so many books and movies, even songs.
Yeah.
He's become like the boogeyman of the 1980s, a figure that continues to both fascinate and repel us.
And it's strange, isn't it, how a real-life story of terror can turn into entertainment? Is there like a line we cross when we do that?
I think that's a really crucial question, especially now with true crime being so popular.
Yeah.
On the one hand, these stories can remind us of the darkness that exists in the world and make us confront some uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Right.
They can also spark really important discussions about the justice system, the nature of evil, and the things that contribute to violence in our society.
But at the same time, there's a risk of making these figures seem glamorous, turning them into anti-heroes or cult icons.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure.
It is.
And it's a responsibility that falls on both the people creating the content and the people consuming it. We gotta strive for accuracy, respect for the victims, and just refuse to sensationalize the violence.
Absolutely. As we continue looking at Richard Ramirez, I keep coming back to that same question. Can we ever really understand the why behind what he did?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. The human psyche, especially when it's been warped by trauma and darkness, is a labyrinth.
Right.
But maybe by trying to understand, we can at least gain some insights, maybe a glimmer of understanding that might help us prevent things like that from happening again.
A glimmer of hope in the dark story.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is the duality of human nature.
Yeah.
Our capacity for incredible good and an unimaginable evil.
And while it's tempting to look away from the darkness, pretend it isn't there,
Right.
I think it's so important that we confront it.
Yeah.
It's the only way we can really understand it, learn from it, and try to build a future where darkness has less power.
Really well said. So before we wrap up, let's shift gears a bit and talk about what happened after Ramirez was caught. What was the lasting impact of his crimes on Los Angeles? And are there any lessons we can learn from this dark chapter in history?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the details of each crime, but we should step back and look at the bigger picture.
For sure, this isn't just about one man and his darkness.
Right.
It's about a whole city living in fear, feeling unsafe, and the scars that trauma leaves behind.
The source talks about how Ramirez's crimes just sent this wave of panic across LA.
Yeah, people were terrified to be alone in their own homes, even to go out at night.
Wow.
And that feeling of being vulnerable,
Yeah.
it doesn't just disappear overnight. The effects of something like that can linger in a community for years.
Even after the threat is gone.
Exactly.
You're right. Even though they caught Ramirez, the impact on his victims, their families, the whole city, it's profound.
And that's something we often forget when we talk about true crime. The real cost of these crimes goes way beyond the actual events themselves.
Yeah.
It tears apart families and communities and leaves behind a feeling of unease that can be hard to shake.
It makes you think, could anything have been done to prevent all this? Were there signs we missed chances to intervene that could have changed everything?
That's a question that comes up with every case like this.
Yeah.
We can't change the past, but we can learn from it.
Right.
By studying how criminals behave, by understanding what leads to violence, maybe we can identify people who are at risk and help them before it's too late.
I guess that's a little bit of hope in a dark story.
Yeah.
Because in the end, we're talking about that double-sided nature of humans.
Yeah.
Capable of amazing good and unbelievable evil.
And it's easy to want to look away from the bad stuff, pretend it isn't real.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to face it head on.
Confront it.
Yeah, that's the only way we can really understand it, learn from it, and work towards a world where that kind of darkness has less power.
Well said. So I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Richard Ramirez.
Okay.
It's been a journey into the darkest parts of the human mind.
It has.
but I hope it's given you some things to think about.
Me too. We've looked at the facts, explored his motives, considered the impact of his actions.
Right.
But in the end, that question of why is still a mystery.
Yeah.
One that we all have to wrestle with in our own way.
We hope this deep dive has challenged you to think critically.
Yes.
And to face those hard truths about what shapes our world. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop trying to understand, even when things are dark.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.